Go. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, lovely people. This is Marie Alessi with the one and only David Ferrugio. David, I have to say this up front. I'm a little bit starstruck sitting here with you because I have this you're my absolute podcast crush. Like I absolutely love what you do. I've been following you for a while and I'm really, really excited to have you here. So for those very few people in the world who don't know you, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please? Welcome.
Sure. Yeah, that was a hell of an introduction. You might be the first person to put star in my name together, but I appreciate it. So, thank you for being here. It's an honor to talk to you. It's really nice to connect. And yeah, so I mean, I don't know if I could top what you said, but I'm the host of Dead Talks podcast. I've had it for a few years. I normalize the conversation around death and loss in a very eclectic amount of ways. I cover a lot of different areas. If it involves death, whether spiritually, philosophically, grief, true crime, afterlife, any of that stuff, I probably tried to cover it with some avenues
Mm.
still yet to explore, but I just believe in the conversation in a sense of removing any taboo stigma behind it by just sharing stories, having open dialogue, and listening to people's perspectives and whatnot.
Ta-da! That's it. Yeah, perfect. I absolutely, absolutely love it. So, as I said, I've been following you for quite some time. I love that you said afterlife because I just recently watched your interview with Matt Fraser, and I've been following Matt for a while. And I don't know about you, but in like when you work with the space of grief, death, I think you naturally always come across mediums sooner or later, like that reach out to you, that have messages, conversations. What's your take on that? Do you get bombarded with this with a podcast that you have, or
Yeah, I get a lot of
how did you?
messages for sure. I
Yeah.
don't know about bombarded, but that's subjective, I
Hmm.
suppose. But I do get a
Yeah.
fair amount of messages reached out from people that tell me they're mediums, this, that, and the other. And
Hmm.
I can't get to all of them, but I entertain some of them just so at least I'm curious what they're going to say. And I take it with a grain of salt because I do believe in that trait or ability, if you will. I just,
Yeah.
I always have my ear up in regards to anything in life. There's just people that are bullshitting at any avenue of life.
Yeah.
So you got to be wary of that, especially with something like
Absolutely.
this. But
Mm.
other than that, it's something that I find fascinating. So I want to share stories and leave it to the audience in order to decide what's real or what's not, or whatever you believe, and just listen to them.
I
But
love that.
I have gotten some experiences passed to me. One woman, I gave her some of my time and ended up going about 45 minutes off the
Hmm.
mic, and it just didn't resonate at all. Like she was saying
Yeah.
things that I can't, I'm not going to confirm that she was BSing me or maybe I shut an off day or something like that, but it didn't, she didn't hit any points. And I was honest with her. I wasn't rude or anything like that. I was like, listen,
Yeah.
she was so sure that she was going to blow me away by specifically using those words
Mm.
before the session.
Yeah.
And she didn't. I was like, listen, you didn't really hit anything on that. So I don't know what to tell
Yeah.
you. And she was
Yeah.
shocked that she didn't say anything accurately. Like even little things. It's like, was your dad a big hockey player? Like he loved hockey? I'm like,
Mm.
no, that's literally
No.
probably on the bottom of his list. Then she kept going down the line,
Wow.
just was missing and missing and missing.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So there's little things like that, and I'm open minded to it. I'll give someone a shot, but
Yeah.
I got to keep my ears up.
Yeah. I love that. So what I know about you is probably what everybody knows who's following your podcast. And I would really love to take the opportunity today to go a little bit more about who's they behind that talks, behind the podcast. And for those of you who don't know, can you please just briefly share your story? Because I know that you lost your dad in 9/11 when you were 12 years old. Can you elaborate a little bit about what happened on that day, what you
Sure.
remember?
Yeah, sure. I probably 9/11 probably doesn't need an introduction, but yeah, my dad
No.
worked in the World Trade Center. He
Yeah.
worked on the 105th floor, and yeah, I was 12 years old, and I could take you back. I'll skip some of the details just for your
Yeah.
audience's sake.
That's all
And
right.
I was in seventh grade at the time, and that day I remember my buddy Jeff walked in. First period, he was notoriously late, so he happened to come in after nine
Mm,
o'clock when the news happened, and he
mm,
asked me, he goes, "David, does your dad work in the doesn't your dad work in the World Trade Center?" I said, "Yeah, why?" He goes, "A plane hit the building," and I remember him saying that, and I was a little confused. This is a weird ass sentence for
yeah.
anyone to say, and I don't remember how I responded, but at some point I tried going down to the main office to contact my family. They wouldn't let me make
Mm,
phone calls,
mm,
which, looking back, it was a big commuter town. A lot of people worked in the
yeah.
city, so they probably couldn't, have every child running to the main office to make a phone call.
Yeah.
And long story long, I went through that school day wondering what was going on. My family left me in school that day. Just, they had a lot to figure out. Like they didn't know what to do. No one, you're in this fight or flight mode. Who knows what's the right way to go? But I personally think it was the right choice. Were they going to bring a 12-year-old back to home while they don't know if my dad's still alive? They don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
So I went through the school day, ended up walking home with my best friend James, and I'll never forget walking around that final bend where I saw all
Hmm.
the cars set outside my house, and that's when I realized that something went down for sure because there shouldn't be cars on a Tuesday after school packing my cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And I got to the living room with my mom or someone trying to keep me from the TV to see what happened because at this point everything already happened. So that's the bizarre
Yeah.
part
And it
looking
was
back at it.
all over TV. You couldn't get away from it.
Of course. So
Yeah.
at this point, everything was already done. So it was just a replay. And as soon as I
Mm.
got to the living room, I remember seeing the footage for the first time. I forced myself to the TV, and that's when I just broke down, realizing the significance of it because it was all
Yeah.
done. It was, again, my
Yeah.
dad was already gone. The attacks were over. The debris was already scattered throughout the sky. And I
Mm.
was just watching a replay of my father's death, let alone the thousands of others that were there.
Yeah.
And, it's still weird to think looking back as a grown man now, I think about different angles and just the experience in general. It's bizarre just to say the words, my dad was killed, even though it wasn't a
Mm.
personal attack on him.
Yeah.
It's weird the way he died, again, amongst
Mm.
others.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've done a lot of reflecting over the time. My grief, if you will, has evolved over the years, as I think everyone's grief
Mm.
does.
Yeah.
And yeah, it really hit me as I grew up. As I got older, I was mature enough to understand, had more life experiences, able to really philosophize and try to reflect on my experience, and which took me
Yeah.
to this path that I'm talking to people
Mm.
about death to no surprise. And
Yeah.
so, sorry.
I just said, yeah. I,
Oh, yeah,
I
sorry.
just,
Yeah.
yeah. I just wanted to ask you about this because, I mean, obviously we said that before you were 12 when that happened, and now you're in your 30s, I think. And when and how did you actually come up with that idea? I'm going to do a podcast about that and then evolve to interviewing, celebrities, if I may say so, and people who have had their own connection or their own path through grief, their own connection with death. How did that evolve from 12 to what you do now? Because obviously you wouldn't have started that straight after, but
Yeah, no, unless
yeah.
someone had the podcast invention, I didn't know about it in 2001. But so yeah, I didn't have like a eureka moment in regards to when I had the idea. But when I do remember having small memories of, I guess, sometime throughout my teens, maybe later on into high school,
Mm,
college, probably college, where I felt as if I was going to do some kind of speaking. It wasn't coming from a place of this is what I want to do. I just always had that
yeah.
feeling, as weird as that sounds. And I thought it'd come back to my father naturally, or at
Mm,
least my experience. And, many years later, 5 years ago, maybe a little bit, even a year before it actually launched, I was like, oh, I should maybe consider doing a podcast talking about it and, spouting off ideas in regards to, I wanted to speak to other people. I don't think people want to hear just me constantly yapping. So I
mm,
was like, I want to share other people's experiences, which kind of grew from the idea that my father died in the public light. I constantly get the
yeah.
attention every single year. I got a lot of attention going through this because everyone knows 9/11. And I
Yeah.
felt a little bit of guilt attached to that in regards to like, I'm getting all this acknowledgement. Everyone knows when my father died, so they
Mm,
remember the anniversary. And then I
yeah.
just retroactively thought about how others don't get that attention when they die on
Mm,
September 12th, for example, on
yeah.
another Tuesday, not in the public light. So it was a blend of my process of not being very externalized and voicing my feelings, and I've always internalized things, and the importance of getting comfortable with it, which I have,
Mm,
at least important to me, maybe not to others.
yeah.
It was a blend of wanting to
I
be able
think
to
it's
talk
very
about it.
important for
Yeah,
everyone. Yeah.
right. And so I think it was important to be able to talk about it and also shed light on other people's stories based on what I just aforementioned. And so it was a
Mm,
blend of both those reasons and just wanting to get more stories and perspectives out there based on my natural curiosity. And I
mm,
thought, what better way to normalize the conversation than by talking to other people, having a good time while doing it, even though some episodes are heavier than others. I talk to
yeah.
comedians, scientists,
Yeah.
near-death experience. It's a very eclectic conversation on purpose.
Mm,
And yeah, so I want whatever it was, I just decided to do it. At first, I was like, maybe I should just talk to comedians. I remember I had a
hmm.
layover. That's the one thought process I do remember. I had a layover in Denver one time, so I had a few hours to kill. I was walking around. I went to a weed
Oh, you're
shop.
frozen
And
now.
frozen? Am I still here?
Might have lost you there. I
Let
don't
me
know
uh let
if
me
that's
do
on your
something.
end or on mine. Oh, you're back now.
I had a I actually have an episode uploading at the same time, so maybe that was interfering.
That's
So
okay.
am I
I've got
back?
you
Am I
back.
good?
Yes, you're back.
Cool. Yeah, so back to this, maybe it was the weed story that kicked off the technology issue right now. So yeah,
I love it.
I was smoking a joint in Denver. I was thinking about the idea of the podcast. I remember calling my buddy Will. I was like, should I only like with squinty eyes, like, should I only talk to comedians because I have a messed up sense of humor. Humor has been such an important part to me. Maybe
Yes.
I should just keep it lighthearted. And then maybe I should just talk to people that lost parents. And it was too pigeonholed. So I just like, let's just talk
Mm,
to everyone.
yeah.
And long story long, I started the podcast in 2020 and just been consistent and just continue doing this and on this path where now I think it's just going to be a forever thing. And here I am.
Yeah. I think that's pretty awesome. I really love it. And yeah, I love that the joint story got interrupted with the internet. Damn you.
There it is.
So no, it's awesome. I have to say, like what you said, really you touched me on such a very personal level because you said, for it was such so in the public eye. And for other people, it would have been, September 12th, and my dad passed away on September 12th, 9 years prior to yours, and obviously not in the public eye. So that to me was a really beautiful connection there where I'm like, I can still resonate with that because, yes, your dad was one of close to 3,000 people who lost his life on that day, and it obviously touched the entire world. I think that everybody would still remember where they were on that day. I remember that I started a new job in advertising. We had no internet, nothing. And one of my bosses actually was American and he was just running around on his cell phone, running back and forth, making phone calls. I know that I had literally gotten out of a job as a flight attendant, flying for Austrian Airlines. I was in New York like 3 times a month. I was constantly there. My only concern was like, who of my colleagues is there, and I've got sort of extended family there. So everybody remembers that day. It was so in the public eye. Everybody remembers what they did. And there is the natural, having the anniversary and having things being done and sort of celebrating the people's lives on that day. So the whole world does that. And I love that you've done a podcast out of that. I recently also watched one of your conversations, one that probably touched me the most and deepest out of all was obviously the conversation with your mum. I loved that you had her on your podcast, because to me, it felt like watching my story in a flip side because my sons are now 17 and 15. As I said before, they were 10 and 8 when my husband passed very unexpectedly. So they have watched me grow through that. They have watched me go through a journey of grief. And I knew that I wanted to do that differently for them to what happened when my dad passed away. Because one thing that you mentioned in your podcast as well is the word isolated. And that comes up quite a lot when people go through grief. Can you maybe share a little bit about that, the feeling of isolation when you go through that?
Yeah, it's interesting because my specific experience relating to my dad, even though I've had plenty of people die in my life, even before him and after, and
Mm,
like keeping it into the relationship that I have losing my dad, it was a contradiction because again, it was in such a public light that it was almost the opposite of isolation. But
yeah.
even within the public light, where it's such a communal grief and there's so many people involved, whether you ask for it or not,
Mm,
it's still isolating in many ways because it's individual regardless. And my
yeah.
opinion on the isolation, I don't have an answer, but if I was to kind of try to come up with some theories as to why I think it's so isolating, I think it's just because it's an individual experience. I think the cliche is a reason why they say everyone grieves differently. So you can have, I have two
Mm,
sisters. We all
mm,
lost our father. We all lost our
yeah.
dad at the same time, obviously, and it's still such a unique experience for each of us. The point of that is
Yeah.
even under the same roof, everyone experiences it differently. Everyone internalizes it differently. Everyone expresses it differently.
Mm,
Everyone finds coping mechanisms that work or don't work differently, and I just
yeah.
have generally different perspectives in any aspect of life. So my thought is, I think it feels isolating because sometimes you may feel like you're the only one that feels this,
Yeah.
and because it's true, because no
Yeah.
matter what, you could have. 1,000 people could have the same father, as weird as that sounds, but
Mm.
every one of those is going
Yeah.
to be a different feeling. It's going to be a
Yeah.
because you are uniquely you, so therefore any experience you have is going to be uniquely experienced. So
Yeah.
I just wonder if it's so isolating because of that, and then who knows, there's other variables in regards to not having a support system, not having people there to comfort you, not having people there that you even just feel like they understand, even though I think the pill to swallow is no one's ever going to fully understand because, again,
Mm.
it's your experience. No one's ever going to know how you
Yeah.
feel outside of your explanation, but they're never
Yeah.
going to feel it. They're never actually going to feel it, from my understanding. So
I
I
agree.
think there's a lot of different variables as to why people feel isolated. And I think one of the easiest ones is if you don't have the support. And that's where I
Mm.
hope discussions like this come in, because some people don't have the support system with the physicality of relationships with people or someone they can call. And I think I'm seeing more outlets outside of my podcast. There's other great podcasts out there,
Mm.
like what we're doing now, and that can offer that support, even if it's not the same as having a good friend. So,
Yeah.
the isolating thing is a normal feeling, but again, to me,
Mm.
which may come off as insensitive, it's death is may feel the most isolating thing in the world, but it's also the most common thing in the world. So we
Yeah.
all go through death in our own ways with everyone. Everyone's going to, not personally with everyone, but everyone is going to die. Everyone is
It's the
going to
one thing we
grieve.
all have in common. We all are born.
It's
We're all gonna die. I
exactly, yeah. So
absolutely
one
agree.
thing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, oh,
Yeah.
everyone, how many people have gone through this? There's been some, everyone
Mm.
goes, almost everyone's going to or has gone through this in some capacity. People have gone
Yeah.
through it in the past. So there's different little like weird little semantics to kind of talk your way out of this isolation aspect. But at the
Mm.
end of the day, how you feel is how you feel. And I think it's important to allow, if you feel like you're isolated, okay, well, sit in that. Allow yourself to feel that
Yeah.
isolation. Don't judge it.
Yeah.
Don't try to uh, demonize it. Just accept it for what
Mm.
you feel. And then I sometimes you can drag a story along. You can deduce ideas as to what's it's coming from, why I feel this way. Sometimes you just got to allow yourself to feel that, feel the isolation,
Yeah.
and then try to contemplate a little bit like, am I truly alone? And if you really feel truly alone because you have zero people in your life, then
Yeah.
maybe try to reflect on, this isn't advice, this is just thoughts, but maybe try to
Yeah.
reflect on, okay, there's other people grieving in this world. There's other people, I guarantee you feel the same way. You're not the same
Mm.
way in the same way, but the same way with the general idea of isolation. So I think even when you feel isolation, the way to not feel isolated is thinking that other
Mm.
people feel isolated, and therefore
Yeah.
you're kind of not isolated because maybe other people feel the same way.
Yeah.
So there's a million different directions I can go on what isolation may feel, but that's kind of how I
Yeah.
perceive it.
I think something that you hit on there, I wanna highlight that and ask a little bit more about that because to me, it is all about allowing, the allowing to sit in whatever emotions come up and not try to suppress them, and also allowing yourself to heal. Because I think there is this misconception that, and I'd really love to hear your opinion on that. I wanna share mine quickly if that's okay with you because there is this conception, or I want to call it misconception, that you can't heal grief and grief will stay with you forever. So here's my spiel on that. Because I obviously shared that before, I had my fair share in grief. And when my dad passed away, I was grieving very, very differently. I felt very isolated. I felt like I was the only one that happened to in the entire world. I knew that wasn't true, but that's how I felt. I felt very alone in that. My friends all sort of disappeared. They didn't know what to say. And then when we reconnected a year later, they were all like, "Oh, we just didn't know what to say." I'm like, "Well, I just needed somebody to be there. It doesn't matter what you said. I just felt so alone in this." And I was. And as I said, I didn't want my boys to have that experience. I went about grief very, very differently. I consider myself lucky that Rob and I had this what if conversation about 3 years prior to his passing. He drove past what happened to be a fatal accident, and it hit home for us because we learned later that a young dad had lost his life. His daughter was only 16 months old, and he died in a front on car truck collision. And we sat on our bed that night, and we were like, what would you do if something was to ever happen to me? We had this conversation. I think it was really, really important because the outcome of that conversation, in a nutshell, I would want you to create the happiest life possible for you and the boys. That became my North Star in my darkest hour only 3 years later. And when I was going through my own grief journey and I was literally chasing happiness, people didn't understand what I was doing. They thought I wasn't grieving properly. Some people might even have thought I was disrespectful or I didn't love Rob properly. Au contraire, like because of the love we had, I wanted to carry that on. I didn't want to make the life about his loss. I wanted to make the life about the love that we had, the happiness that we shared. I wanted to continue that exactly like we promised each other. So, as I was going through my own journey and then helping others through that journey, I noticed that grief does change over time. Of course, it does. We all know that. But for me, I didn't treat grief as something that will stay with me forever, that will label me forever. I don't want to be labeled by that. I treat grief like a visitor. So I have this little story about joy and grief. Like joy is a permanent resident in our house, and grief comes to visit every now and then. And when she comes and I have time, I sit with her. I might laugh with her. I might cry with her. I might do whatever. Might just sit and not talk. But then she goes her way, and I bid her farewell. And joy comes back. Usually she leaves when grief is here. Well, not always. Sometimes the three of us sit together. So I always tell this little story around that, especially like when I do a family bereavement session and I work with kids. I tell that story because I think that's something that everybody can relate to. But this is really how I see grief. I see grief like something that every now and then comes to visit, and that's okay. And I'll never not, if I can, I make time for it. I can't always, depending on where I'm at the time. But I like to treat grief like that, like a visitor, like something that has happened in my life and it comes and goes, not something that is permanently there, that labels me. I I did actually a TEDx talk on redefining our image of a widow because I don't like that label. I don't want to be labeled as something that just relates to one event in my life. I'm so much more than that one event. And Rob was so much more than that one event. Your dad, so much more than that one event. So that was my long story long. I'd love to hear your take on that. How do you see grief? Is it something that you feel like, oh yeah, it stays with you forever? How do you treat that or see it?
I used to play rugby in college, and
Mm,
I think it was during practice, I messed up my hand, and then during the game I played right after with the hurt hand, I ended up breaking my hand pretty bad,
mm,
and I had to get surgery. I had to get surgery years after, and I still have this scar on my hand. And it took a
yeah.
while. And sometimes I wonder, I think my strength isn't quite there yet, even years later, but I think it's mostly come
Mm,
back. And so I kind of look at grief as more or less a scar in many ways, where
yeah.
it's technically fully healed.
Mm,
So I don't like saying you can't fully heal because I also am just big on
yeah.
the way I say things and the way I verbalize
Yeah.
things. If you're going to
Same.
say I'm never going to heal, then you're never going to heal.
Mm,
And so I do feel healed, but in regards to your analogy, it's kind of similar to that. Like every now and then, I can learn to live with it because I am
yeah.
healed. I got my strength back little by little, and it
Mm,
came back to normal. But there's still that scar there. It's the scar. I forget it's there because I'm living with it constantly. But at the
yeah.
same time, it doesn't interfere with my life so much constantly because my hand feels better, and it
Mm,
slowly has gotten better over time. But every now and then, when I look at my hand, I still notice that scar. So it's kind of it's always going to be there. You're always going to
yeah.
have that scar, and your skin's
Yeah.
not going to look the same metaphorically, but it's still healed in many ways down the line with
Mm,
if for me. So as long as you put that work together, I mean, this
yeah.
hand thing may be a terrible analogy, but if I didn't do physical
No.
therapy, if I didn't work
Yeah.
towards getting this grip strength back, then my hand would have been all messed up for the rest of my life. Wouldn't be able to use my left
Mm,
hand. But it
yeah.
does take intention. It does take being proactive and figuring out what works for you. And yeah,
Mm,
even though I believe you can get healed, I
yeah.
think maybe people misconceive the idea of healing as, yeah, your life's not going to be the same. So
Of course not.
if you're equating your life to not being the same as being healed, then yeah, I guess you're
Mm,
right that you're not going to get fully healed. But
yeah.
I think the long-term effects of grief are just a complete overshift on my perspective of life. It's completely shifted the way I see people. It's completely shifted the
Mm,
way I love. It's completely shifted the way I think about the
mm.
present moment.
I
And
love
so
that.
in that sense, it feels healing in many ways.
Yeah.
So healing, whatever you want to call it, I just try to strive to feel better and try and strive for that happiness and that joy. And maybe one day it's not going to feel as heavy. You're going to have those moments where it does visit you, but it's going to visit you in different
Mm,
ways.
yeah.
Sometimes it's not so much sadness this part of my life. Even if tears come out, it's not sadness. It's just, oh, that sucks. It's just, yeah, I
Mm,
miss my dad. It
yeah.
does suck, but the way I see death at this point, especially for me personally, the way that my dad died, it was so abrupt and shocking
Mm,
that I just learned at a young age, oh, this shit happens. This happens. And this
yeah.
happens all the time. There's people, let alone
Yeah.
die all the time. There's shocking ways that people die and people have this idea that our loved ones are going to be with us forever, and to me that's literally absurd. That's not the
Yeah.
case. It's not going to happen, if whether you go first or they go first.
Mm,
So this idea that of this expectation of permanence, oh, my I'm supposed to have my dad for the rest of my life.
yeah.
No, I mean, yes, I guess by theory, sure, yeah, you should
Yeah.
because they're older and they should live longer, but that's not how it goes. Like the shit life will throw you curveballs. This will happen. And
Yeah.
but when it happens to you, it shakes your world. And that is part
Hmm.
of grief. Part of grief is balancing this weird emotional charcuterie board of flavors that sometimes you don't know which is which. You don't know what emotion you're feeling because it's possibly all of them. But
All of them, yeah.
it takes a balancing act, and yeah, grief will be with you forever in different avenues, not just the pain or sorrow. Grief
Mm,
will just shift your perspective, and because your perspective is shifted,
that's
you can always
certainly,
find the root of it due to grief, and therefore it may feel like it's not healing because it's constantly with you, but
yeah,
I still think you can heal. You can heal. Like I also I don't
yeah,
buy into the non-healing, but your life's not going to be the
yeah.
same, so it just
Oh,
feels
absolutely
like it
not.
can
Yeah.
heal.
And how could it be? Like, you have your, you think you have your life mapped out, like Rob was the one who often said when people ask him in job interviews, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? And he often joked about that because Rob and I met and he was like, click. And he proposed to me 5 months later, and another 5 months later, we were married. And none of us would have either, like, would have ever seen that coming. And it was such a whirlwind. And we had this whirlwind romance for till the day he passed. We were that couple. Everybody was like, "Oh my God, you and Rob," and I never had a regret in my life. And then I just wanted to continue that love and happiness that we had. And I love that you brought that up because I often compare. The physical and emotional pain, so I think it's a really great comparison what you said about your hand. Um, when I think of this, especially perfect example, September 11, when you think of that and you think of all the wounded people that were laying around there, nobody in their right mind would have said, "Oh, just stay there, just don't do anything. This will last forever. This will hurt forever. Just you have to just sit with that. There's nothing we can do." Yet we do that on an emotional basis. So when somebody gets physically hurt, we do everything in our right mind to instantly ease the pain, soothe the pain, dress their wounds, help them to get to a hospital, to a doctor as soon as possible. But when there's emotional pain, there is a complete polar opposite how people treat it. It's like, oh yeah, that has to hurt forever. It's absolutely right. Yeah, suffer a little bit more. No, you have to sit with your grief. You cannot be happy right now. You have to sit. And I'm like, why on earth do people have this weird conception of how you're supposed to deal with grief? And that often comes from people who've actually not done it. So there is this idea of that we're supposed to suffer when we're grieving, that we're not supposed to um, like ease that pain in any way. We have to sit with the emotion. And I'm like, says who? I think it's absolutely like for me, it's been 6.5 years now. And I have now come to the point where some waves of grief are coming back that I felt might have come in the beginning, but because I chose to do whatever I can to create the happiest life possible, I took my boys and traveled around the world with them for 2 months. People did not understand what I was doing, but I wanted to take them away from all these first milestones to come without their dad. I wanted to create happiness for them, lightness for them. And I'm so glad I did. And even my son said they are so glad that I did what I did. That brings me back to your conversation with your mum. I love that your mum said pretty much in the beginning of your conversation, it almost felt like an epiphany like while she was talking to you, where she said, "You were actually my support system," I think she called it.
Mhm.
It was so beautiful to hear that you were the reason for her to get through that, to hold space for you. Do you want to share a bit about your mum? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I mean that specific moment was a big one because I brought up something that was always on my heart in regards to me being, the man of the house at 12 years old because I
Yeah,
was technically the man of the house being
yeah.
with two sisters and my dad being gone. So
Mm,
I forget. Again, I don't even know if I made that shit up or someone. I'm pretty sure someone told me that like you're the man of the house, which is why it stuck to me. And I always look back at it now as a grown man, thinking, okay, but did I step up as the man of the house? Was I the man of the
mm,
house? Yada yada yada.
mm.
And I brought that up, and then yeah, she kind of quickly shut me up in a loving way about, yeah, you were my support system. Like
Yeah,
you were my reason for continuing this because you meaning me and my sisters. Like she had kids to
yeah.
look out for, and so she leveraged like the love that we had in order for her to get through this and drive through this like she did in such an amazing way. So
Mm,
yeah, that was a big moment for me to hear it from her. And I think it might
yeah.
have been one of the first times we actually had that conversation and just happened to be on a podcast 20 something years later. But
I love it.
yeah, no, and she found a why. And there's, Viktor Frankl has a book, Man's Search for Meaning, and that was a big
Mm,
thing. I think it's
yeah.
logotherapy in regards to having
Incredible
your
book.
why more or less. And when you find your why or look for your why, or at least be open-minded to a why, that can really drive you through
Yeah.
everything. And then some people just immediately give up on a why when someone dies. And,
Mm,
it's sad. It's giving up too soon, if you ask me. And
mm,
you have to go through
yeah.
you might have to go through a time where it feels like you have no why, and that's all right. So
Mm,
the only variable in regards to the analogy of how, when you talk about the physical pain, how people have to attend to them immediately,
mm.
and why they don't do that with grief. I think it's
Oh, you're breaking up again.
it's okay. How about now? Is that better?
Waiting for David to come back. We're breaking up.
Check, 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 check.
Ah, there you are. There you're
Here we
back.
are.
Yeah.
So I mean, anyway, what I was saying in regards to the physical comparison that you brought up,
Hmm.
I personally think sitting in it is important. I don't think an immediate attention to just going to fix it, like a
Mm,
physical injury, is the same thing in that sense. I think,
yeah.
because if you get through a physical injury, yeah, you have to deal with the pain until you find help, but and you can get
Mm,
painkillers, of course. But I think
yeah.
a painkiller in regards to going through something like grief is the worst thing you can do, because you're just postponing what you have to feel inevitably in order to get
Yeah.
better. So
Yeah.
I think I do think sitting in it is very important.
Mm,
And for me, growing up, I accidentally did exposure therapy, which in my way of not even knowing what exposure therapy as a kid was, I would constantly
yeah.
watch the footage. I would rewatch the 9/11 footage, the tower going
Yeah.
down, people running around, every angle I could find. I would watch the videos by myself over and over again
Mm,
until I got tears out of my eyes, and I was viscerally feeling every emotion possible, the sadness, the
yeah.
pain, the anger, everything. And I think
Yeah.
I accidentally started my healing process doing that, by facing it, by allowing myself to
Mm,
feel it, by not running away from it, by not
yeah.
distracting myself or escaping. And so
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's a timeline on that. Do it whenever you got to do it, or don't do it at
Mm,
all. That's your life. But for me, facing anything that comes up in life is the only way to get through it. You don't go
yeah.
around the storm, you go through it.
Yeah. I think it always comes back to exactly what we said before. I always say that every journey of grief is just as unique as the person experiencing it, and you have to find what works for you. But I think what we definitely agree on here is you have to find what works for you. You have to find something that works for you. Just sort of staying stuck in it and not moving forward, to me, that's not an option. And I think it's because, for me, I call that the irony of grief, in such that people are grieving and they're sad because of a life that has ended, but then they do the exact same. They stay stuck in their life and basically don't move forward in their life because of that. That, to me, is an irony. There's like, you actually doing exactly what you're grieving here at the moment. So for me, it was always important to find a way forward. And to me, moving forward with happiness, with love, and focusing on that and chasing happiness did not mean to not grieve. It just felt like I was doing all of it at once, and we were laughing and cheering at one moment, and then sitting and crying and holding each other in the other. And like the first 9 months, we like literally slept in the same bed. They were like very, very close to me. And so for me, coming back to your story, because you were 12, you were sort of similar age to my boys, they were 8 and 10. What was your support system when you went through that? You said you did confrontational therapy, like you call it now, and I really like that, because I think it makes a lot of sense to let the emotion out, to cry it out. I feel that is very, very healthy, and very rarely what is suggested to, especially boys. I have to say, this whole boys don't cry BS, I don't like it. So, what was your support system to go through that, to find the strength to actually walk through that storm, as you said?
Yeah, I mean, I was, for whatever reason, completely blessed to have a tremendous support system. So that's why
Mm,
I feel even more for people that don't have certain support systems,
mm,
which is why I hope platforms like these help. Of course,
mm,
my mother's, my sisters, my family, my friends who know who they are, have been and have always been incredibly supportive. They're still there for me, and I
yeah.
hope I'm returning the favor in many ways. But I've had a mother that is willing to fight for us. I have sisters that's willing to
Mm,
fight for me, and vice versa. I have friends and family that showed up constantly and have since for the last 25 years. I've had a mom that is gentle around me and aggressively perfect at the same time, where she wants me to talk, she didn't force me to talk, would give me the opportunity to talk no matter what I said. It wouldn't matter. Same with my mom and sister. Same with my sisters. We had people at the house nonstop in the immediate future, and people constantly checking us in with us throughout there. It wasn't overwhelming. That we had space when we needed it. But
Mm,
yeah, the support system I had, I sometimes can't even take credit for some of the things that I've had to go through because I've had so much help. And
yeah.
even, even amongst the support, it still feels isolating as we discussed because I'm still having my own internal experience, which is on me. And I think
Mm,
at some point you have to become accountable. I think, a lot of people look at things that happen on the outside world that happen to us. I just don't see things happening to us. I just see them as happenings. And I
yeah.
don't want to
Same.
victimize events, even if it comes from an evil place. In the case of my
Mm,
father, I, I think at some point, you got to go through it. However, you got to do it. You got to, like you said, figure out what works for you. And the only way to figure out what works for you is by trying different things, whether that's support,
mm,
whether it's writing, expressing, working out, whatever, in a hopefully a healthier way. You got to try
yeah.
different things and see what works. You can't stand still. And sometimes you can't
Yeah.
stand still. I'm saying you can't. Like sometimes it's okay.
Yeah.
Like
I get
veg
it.
out, do nothing, sit out there for a few
Yeah.
days or however long you got to do. But at some
But
point,
don't
you got to
stay
wake
there.
up. Yeah, at some point, you got to take responsibility for yourself and how you're going to respond to the event.
Mm. I think it really hit me quite directly actually, also because of my story. When you said that whole you're the man of the house, that is something that a lot of people said to Flynn, my older son. And I thought, to me, from a mom's perspective, I found that a very fine line, that balancing act, as in honoring that he is now the oldest male in our family, and also to allow him to still be a child. So we had a lot of conversations around that, obviously age appropriate at that stage. But I also really wanted to honor that, because that was now his role, and he really stepped into that. Like, you should see him, how protective he can become of his younger brother. I really love that. I love seeing that. I wanted to ask you something. I'm jumping around here a little bit, but this whole family thing brought it up for me. Ferruccio, Italian background. Is that from your dad or your mom, or both of them?
Ferrugio's from my dad's side, so
Yeah.
Ferrugio's Sicilian, and my mother's side is Napolitan, so her side is from Naples.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause, yeah, I inherited the Alessi surname, so that's from my dad, from my
I
sorry, from my
love that.
husband's dad's side. So yeah, I love that.
Beautiful.
David, it is absolutely beautiful to have you here. I'm so happy that you made time to come live with me and to share a little bit more about your life, about the background of who you are behind the podcast as well. And there was one last thing I wanted to ask, and now it escaped.
Yeah, it'll come
It
back if it's meant to
was,
be.
yeah, exactly. Hmm.
Was an afterlife, was it?
Yeah, it was something around that. Isn't that so funny? The afterlife.
I
Well,
had a
I'd love to
feeling.
know. Since it's not coming back, I'm going to ask you straight up. What do you think? What happens after?
I can't. I think something happens. I think we continue on. I guess the
Mm,
big question beyond that is: are we conscious? Are we aware? This and that. I just think
yeah.
it's all one big awareness. I think we do continue on in a spiritual plane. I
Mm,
think a lot of this life, like we naturally do in this meat sack, is to learn, and I think there is some higher transcendence, and I think the work continues when we get there. I feel like all this human these emotions, the egotistical views, I think that just dissipates and we just become this one source, this one piece of energy that is nothing but love, if you will. I think
yeah.
I'm kind of scattering the way I'm describing it because I can't describe what it looks like over there if there's furniture or
Yeah.
not. But I do think we continue. I do think we continue on. I do think we will reconnect with other spirits that we're familiar with. And I
Yeah.
think from what I've gathered from near death experiences and I've had personal ones in my family that, I think when we cross over, we do see a lot of, at least from the patterns of the near death experience that I've had,
Mm,
there's a different experience in the transitionary phase. I think maybe when we buffer over to the other side, whatever that means, we may see what we believe here as kind of an easy transition to absorb the magnificence and incomprehensible notion of what the afterlife is. So I think that tunnel
mm,
vision that we have transitioning may be unique to everyone, partially based on what we believe here. So I think maybe we
yeah.
see what we believe, and then it eventually ends up into this place that we all experience the same. And
Mm,
I think it's just going to be amazing. I think it's going to
mm-hmm,
be something that we just possibly can't comprehend on this side of the plane. And
mm,
I also am aware that I could be completely wrong, and we're going to find out regardless. But at the
mm.
deep core of me, I just don't. I think for me, it makes more sense that there's something after this than not. I know a lot of people that
Yeah.
take the atheistic viewpoint or believe in nothingness, which,
Mm,
like I said, I could be wrong. Maybe I have no idea. I just think that sounds crazy to me more than
Yeah.
people that on that side say. I mean, it makes more sense that it's just nothing. Like, why does that? Why I don't understand why that's the default. Like, there's so much like
Yeah.
you and me are talking from thousands of miles away, however far we are, through this invisible form of frequencies and radio waves that are getting us to
Mm.
see each other's face. That's an invisible world that exists among us that we just accept as normal, even though I would say 99% of the world can't even really explain it. You can give me a Google
Yeah.
definition, but tell me how it works.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe more than 90%. I'm maybe short arming some people that are way smarter than me. But my point is, there's this invisible world all around us constantly that we just accept as normal. But there can't be an invisible world beyond this where we
Yeah.
exist in this spiritual plane. And to me, it just makes
Yeah.
more sense that we continue on in some other form, whatever that
Mm.
may be. And I don't think this is how we. I don't think it's truly dying. I think we just die from
Yeah.
this meat sack we're wearing.
Yeah. I love that because when you touched on near death experience, and you and I both had guests on our podcast that talked about near death experiences, and just seeing the common element that they all share, that there's this purest form of love where I just love that. That is that's what I truly believe in, because not just because you hear it so often, but to me that makes so much sense. And I just gonna leave it at that. But before we go, David, is there any last words that you would like to leave with our audience here? That is like, if you need help with this, if you are stuck in grief, try that. Whatever. I don't know. Like, I'm gonna let you wrap up today's episode with whatever last message you want to leave with our audiences here.
No, I just, I hope to see more of the world being open to having discussions, whatever that may be. It doesn't
Mm,
have to be grief, doesn't have to be death. I just hope people are more open-minded to, or consider being open-minded to listening to other people and truly listening, not hearing them, and being open-minded to other people's thoughts and maybe not judging people on their thoughts or ideologies and attaching beliefs or
yeah.
different things from your own beliefs and completely identifying person based on one belief system or whatever they believe. You don't have to get along, you don't have to agree, you don't have to have a beer with that person, but you'd be surprised at how much you can learn and maybe some of your ideals will change based on just listening to other people. And I think this platform, when it comes to death, grief, exploring the afterlife, spirituality, coping mechanisms, it goes part in, if you are grieving, to try different things. And I think trying different things means listening to different things and being uncomfortable through these conversations. Just because it doesn't
Mm,
align with you doesn't mean that they're wrong. I think two people can be right at the same time, as weird as that sounds, because we're all looking at it from a different lens. So I hope people will open their mind to different ideas that you don't agree with.
mm,
And if anything, pursue different ideas that you don't agree with. Be open to learning and hearing different things. Doesn't mean you have to change your mind, but be open to be malleable to this change, because if we're just stuck in the same place in our own ways, and maybe you're happy there, that's great. Do that. I think there's foundational core things we could stand for that we should always stand on. But then there are
mm,
some things that we should be malleable with and be open minded and not be so quick to judge people. And until you open your mind to that world of other viewpoints, other sets of eyes, then you're just going to be stuck in your own ways. But again, if you're stuck in ways that you like and you're happy, then Godspeed. That's great for you
yeah.
too. Whatever makes you happy, but just be a little
Yeah.
easy on yourself and be a little easy on others.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So be open, more listening, less judgment, more connection. That's all we want, for everyone in this world. I couldn't agree more. So, David, I am so blessed that you were here with me today. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come live with me. And for anyone else who loves this conversation, please feel free to share it. If you think of any one person that popped up while you were listening to us, I'm certain that this person might need to hear this message. So go ahead, share the podcast. Feel free to subscribe for the weekly updates on Unsilence Grief. And I am sure to share all the links to David Ferrugio's podcast, their talks as well. So come back, click in the show notes, have a look around, connect, share, and share the love. So, David, thank you for being here with me today. Everybody else, have a beautiful day. This is David and Marie signing off, and I need my glasses to find that button.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a beautiful day.